So today I'm working on a Magnavox DVD-VCR combo unit. The gentleman that brought this in complained that the unit was completely dead, and when I plugged it in and looked things over, I couldn't see any panel lights whatsoever coming on. So my first thought was, well, we're probably looking at a power supply issue here. So I went ahead and I had to tear it down a little bit to get to the power supply. First of all, I had to take all these ribbon cables off. I actually loosened them ahead of time so I wouldn't have to do it in the video. And this board here came out, a few screws holding this one down. And then underneath we've got our DVD player. It also had 4 screws, but you don't need to see me do that. And underneath there was the power supply. Well, the first thing I did was check the fuse, and I found that the fuse was just fine. And I was a little disappointed because oftentimes when I see a fuse that's blown, especially if it's real black inside, that tells me that there's a major short on the board and it's going to be fairly easy to find. But in this case, I didn't have a bad fuse, so I thought, well, what else has caused it to shut down then and go completely dead the way it did? So I took the circuit board out of here and I began checking for shorts across my capacitors. Now, a lot of times if you have a shorted diode, it'll actually show up when you're checking the capacitors. So just because a particular component shows up as a short doesn't mean that that's the actual component that's bad, because you can have other components that are in parallel with the one you're checking. Anyway, I began checking across the capacitors here, and sure enough I found that this capacitor here appeared to have a short, and so did this one further down the line here. So I went ahead and unsoldered the capacitor, checked it out of circuit. I probably could have just used my ESR capacitor checker, but I thought I'd just pull it out of circuit just to make sure. And the capacitor checked fine. So I said, oh, okay, well, obviously we've got another problem here. And I began checking across the diodes using my diode check function on my meter. And I found that the diode here, this one right down here, was actually shorted out. It's a Schottky diode. It happened to be an SB390, location was D1015, and it was a Schottky diode. So anyway, I looked through my collection of diodes, and I happened to have something slightly bit beefier. Instead of a 3 amp, I went with a 5 amp Schottky, and I put it in, and that took care of it. Now I'm going to let it run for a while. Even though the lights are coming on now, I'm going to let it run for a while before I assume it's totally fixed here. But I'm glad to see that's all it took. You know, the funny thing is, when this thing came in, I got a little overwhelmed at first. I guess I was feeling a little tired. I didn't want to deal with it. And I was thinking it was going to be a lot more complex than it turned out to be. Now, what I like about this unit here, if you might note, the power supply is on its own board here. So when I took the power supply board out, I didn't have to take everything else out like I often do on these other DVD-VCR combo units. And I'm glad they designed it this way, because if you had to do this before, you know it can be a little bit of a hassle. Not that big of a deal. Anyway, it looks like another success, so give the guy a call in the morning and let him know it's fixed. Anyway, as always, I hope you enjoyed the video. If you do, please give it a thumbs up and please subscribe.